Our local represents sessional instructors at the University of Manitoba, as well as student academic workers such as grader markers, TAs, tutors, demonstrators, and student instructors. The reason that we have organized this event on a cold Wednesday afternoon at the end of February is that today, throughout North America, events and actions are taking place to raise awareness about the deplorable wages and working conditions of adjuncts, or as we call them here, sessional instructors. And, as we speak, a number of union locals representing academic workers are at bargaining tables across Canada, trying to gain stronger rights for their members. And back in the US, a movement is underway to unionize adjuncts. Without a union, these workers have no rights whatsoever. With a union, they have more rights, but these rights are still very limited due to the current neoliberal direction taken by university administrations. Even with collective agreements achieved after very difficult struggles, the fact remains that sessionals are contract employees, who are hired course by course, term by term, session by session. We have no real job security, we are paid poverty-level wages, and we have little or no access to benefits. Our student academic workers fare no better. They are facing attacks both as workers and as students. The business model being adopted by universities is resulting in a decrease in programs and course offerings and a degradation in the quality of education. Meanwhile, the specter of tuition fee increases and user fees is ever present. As student workers, they are facing an intensification of their labor with increasing workloads, but with no corresponding increase in the length of time allotted to their work. They are often expected to work for free. All of this is further aggravated when a significant number of students graduate, having studied for many years and deeply in debt, only to find that universities no longer provide academic careers. Through attrition, university administrations are replacing more and more real faculty positions with sessional instructors. A large number of young academics, and some not so young, are facing an extremely difficult and insecure future. CUPE 3909 would like to commend all the students, academic workers, and allies who are struggling against the neoliberal agenda at universities that has brought us to this state. At the U of M, we would particularly like to call attention to the work of the Student Action Network and the Stop the Cuts campaign, as well as all the individuals and groups involved. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Whoop! Little whoop. Ah, I should have gone like that. It is my great honor at this point to introduce our speaker for this event. Many of you know him. Dr. Henry Heller is a distinguished and well-published academic in the Department of History, as well as an active participant in many progressive movements. And he shares the desire of CUPE 3909 to hold events at which people can discuss the profound problems that we face in this society. We are very pleased that he has agreed to speak at this gathering. After the talk, we will have a short question and answer session, and everyone is encouraged to weigh in on the issue. Following that, we invite you to remain for informal discussion with tapas and drinks. So, Dr. Henry Heller.
Well, thank you for coming out today. I'd like to especially thank, of course, CUPE 3909 for inviting me here today to speak about struggling against the neoliberal university. Now, the talk I'm giving today is based on a book that I've completed and sent to a publisher, and I'm actually, as we speak, waiting for a word as to whether or not it's a go, whether the book will or will not be accepted by this particular publisher. That's always an exciting sort of time for academics. And the title of the book is called Capitalism in the American University, an Interdisciplinary History, from 1945 to 2015. Now, why the American university, not the Canadian university? Well, simply because I have to frame the book, and I framed it in terms of the American experience. But a lot of it pertains to, not completely, but it does pertain to Canada. It consists of 5 chapters, and the last chapter in particular deals with the current evolution of the university. It's entitled The Neoliberal University. Now, our campus in the last little while has been agitated by rumors and plans announced by the university administration, which seem to be headed in the direction of future tuition increases, possible job losses, reduction in access to faculties, cutbacks in programs, especially in the humanities and social sciences. The president has announced that plans to emphasize graduate and professional programs at the expense of undergraduate training. The very real possibility of a downsizing of the Faculty of Arts and placing more and more reliance on funding from private as well as as against the public sector. That seems to be the outline, the direction in which things are heading. Now, in response to that, since the fall, we've seen student groups, and in particular this, which has crystallized in the Student Action Network, have two big and I think very successful events. One, a meeting, and followed by a demonstration. And what we've seen beyond that is beyond the students, a kind of coming together of the various unions on the campus, the tenured faculty, contract employees, and indeed non-academic employees, have achieved a certain coalescence as the beginning of a kind of process of unification in terms of an understanding of the situation, and a kind of tentative kind of organizational network has emerged as a result of this concern. I would say that possibly that reflects the seriousness of the problem on this campus, and I would say the degree of malaise that exists generally on this campus, the degree of alienation that exists on this campus, based on the fact that we are ruled over by a kind of corporate organizational form which parallels the business corporation. Now, I think, though, in order to understand what is happening locally, we have to have a wider perspective. We have to have a national perspective, and indeed, we have to gain an international perspective on what is going on exactly. And I'm using the American case, but I think that similar events are underfoot in other countries and indeed across the world. And I've been studying the American example, and so that is what I'm speaking to. But I think you have to remember that this is broader than simply an American process. Now, what we have seen, really, was that the older model of the university, which took form after 1945, from about 1940 to 1980, which created, really, the model of mass education and a research university, which was in itself a great achievement. But its fundamental aim and objective, so it said, was serving the public and the public at large, serving the citizenry of the American state, and indeed parallel to that, the Canadian state, etc. Gradually, from 1980s onwards, that model began to be superseded by a increasing transformation in the direction of what we generally has come to be called the neoliberal university. And how did this come about? It came about basically through a consensus, not a consensus which involved the public at large or indeed the academic community, but a consensus achieved at the national level among business leaders, government leaders, university presidents, and neoliberal economists who, through a series of discussions and organizational linkages, basically transformed what we can call the public interest university into what we today call the neoliberal university. As a result of this consensus, there then gradually followed a transformation of the campuses in the United States and ultimately in Canada. And these, we can recognize these transformations as they affected the University of Manitoba. I think the University of Manitoba has been a part of that process. And so what have we seen? What we're seeing is that funding, public sector funding of the universities has gradually declined, along with a general decline of public sector funding. Universities are just part of a general trend in which we've seen the public sector generally decline, and the universities have been caught up in that process. Taking the place, or as the public sector has withdrawn, what you see is the growing influence of private enterprise, business, and business values pervading the universities, reflecting itself in the fact that the actual administration of the university has been gradually transformed to take the form, to assume the form of a kind of quasi-business organization or corporation. And following from that, one of the, in terms of the methodology in which universities are administered, they are administered by what we call total quality management, which is a form of administration which affects all aspects of the university, but is particularly striking in the way it affects the academic staff of universities, total quality management. The other developments along these lines, I'm just mentioning them, are annual national and global university ranking systems, which are becoming universalized. The development of research parks, the appearance of urban real estate developments, the appearance of ongoing funding and endowment campaigns, the increasing privatization of knowledge through licensing and patenting of so-called intellectual property, higher tuition fees for students, and consequently increased and indeed monumental student debt, particularly striking in the United States. In terms of the academic life of universities, we've seen the reduction, consolidation, and indeed the elimination of certain departments, and the gradual decline of tenured faculty positions, and the employment of more and more contingent labor. These are some of the striking changes that have occurred and that have created what we call help to create the neoliberal university. So the question is, really fundamentally, are we headed basically to, through this process of the neoliberal university, are we headed for the full privatization of higher education? Well, in my opinion, I don't think that is going to happen. Rather, what we're seeing is the harnessing of the public university to the goals of business. This is what is going on, that increasingly the university is being transformed in the direction of, instead of having a kind of overall public mission, it's being harnessed to the purposes of the private sector of the economy, and particularly the dominant sectors of the private sector of the economy. And I would argue that this is a kind of parasitic process. That is to say, the invasion of and occupation of what were originally great public institutions by basically business values and business goals, and more serving the interests of private business. And in this process, in fact, there is a kind of pillaging of the great resources that were built up during from 1945 to about 1980 of the public sector. Public sector higher education is basically being pillaged by the private sector, by the invasion of the private sector. So I would say that as I've outlined it here, and this is all detailed in my book in the last chapter, I would say that this is all being dictated by a very comprehensive and ongoing neoliberal project. This is what we're witnessing. And because it is such a broadly based and comprehensive and well-organized program, the only way it can be effectively opposed by the development of a reactive project from the university community as a whole and from the community to resist this process of essentially the takeover of the university by private enterprise. And that entails several things that I want to talk about for the next few minutes. I'm not going to go on at great length and so on, but I'm just going to talk, how can we resist, really, what is transpiring? Well, I think we need a determined, organized, and conscious political opposition to this problem. We have to understand what is coming down from on high, what the project of the people who basically control the universities and are dictating the agenda, what this project is all about. And we have to then basically at the local level and hopefully at the national level begin to articulate an organized response with a clear sense of goals and long-term commitment to the counter-struggle to the neoliberal project. And in terms of the goals of such an opposition, it would include the restoration of the principle and the fact of a fully funded public university and its commitment to providing the highest level of education possible. It's a fundamental goal of any kind of real resistance to this neoliberal project. Such an opposition would seek a university based on democratic and transparent government, which would include governance by students, faculty, non-academic stance, and non-academic stance, and the public at large. The model of university government that exists at present is an adapted form of the private corporation. That's basically the form of university government that we have today. And I believe that a fundamental goal should be the democratic restructuring of that form of government. Such an opposition would reject the neoliberal idea of the student buying his education, the student as a consumer who rationally chooses to take on crushing debt while facing a completely dubious and uncertain job market. This is the situation that more and more students find themselves in today, would reject that form. Instead, students should be seen as citizens who are trying to develop their critical understanding so far as possible, and their attendance at the university based on their qualifications should be, in effect, tuition-free. We have tuition-free primary school, we have tuition-free high school, and we should have tuition-free universities. We've reached a stage in terms of the development of our society, where it wasn't by accident, it was by struggle and by the reality that high school education became free. And likewise, university education is a social, and indeed, I would argue, even an economic necessity. And there's no reason why students should go out into the world facing a dubious job market and facing crushing debt. This is ridiculous. Such an opposition would reject the neoliberal idea of academics being accountable, and I love that word, accountable, to administratively imposed rather than peer-based reviews, administratively reviews that are coming down from on high. It would aim to dismantle bureaucratic overregulation, which is designed to assert control rather than to effectively administer, and actually interferes with effective teaching and research. Such an opposition would promote self-government at all levels of university life. Such an opposition would reject the neoliberal idea of the commodification of knowledge for purposes of profit. The idea of intellectual property is a misnomer and is self-contradictory. It is in fact linked with efforts to limit and stifle academic and scientific freedom. Intellectual property rights, I would hold, is a particularly insidious idea at the core of neoliberal academic capitalism. This is the way people are now referring to the kind of university that we have at present, neoliberal academic capitalism. Such intellectual property under neoliberal academic capitalism undercuts the fundamental notion of unimpeded access to knowledge, which is the heart of democracy, the notion of the university serving the public good. And as a matter of fact, at the core of whatever success the post-war economy had, that is to say, the free flow of information and knowledge was a fundamental factor in creating the prosperity of the period after 1945 down to around 1980, and we see the increasing commodification and privatization of knowledge. Now, this is no small matter, because the way our economy has evolved, knowledge, people refer to it today as knowledge-based capitalism or knowledge capitalism. Who controls knowledge now has become absolutely central to the whole future development of economic life in our society. So the whole question of intellectual property and the control over property is a central matter. The university and this struggle that we see here in the university and universities across the board is part of a deep struggle going on in society about the future direction of our society. Now, to come to an end here, in this struggle, do we have precedents and examples? This is unknown territory. This is new. We don't know how this struggle, we know that this struggle is going to and is developing, but we don't know how it's going to end, how the story is going to end. Well, we do have from the states, as a matter of fact, among contract workers. There is a movement underway now in the United States, and it's gathering force, particularly evident in California and in the northeastern part of the United States. Unionization drives, successful unionization drives amongst non-contract workers are developing on many, many university campuses. But we also have a Canadian example to bring things to a conclusion, and that is the Quebec student movement. The Quebec student movement, which, of course, went through this long struggle. It lasted weeks and weeks and took years to develop, which based itself on the idea of free tuition mass access to higher education, and public and democratic control over higher education. What we need on this campus right now are organization, stronger campus unions, and alliances between these unions, and a developing political understanding of the struggle that lies before us. Thank you very much.
Well, at this point, I'd first of all just like to thank everybody for coming. It's a really encouraging turnout, and also obviously thank Henry for speaking. We have a little while for a bit of time for questions if anybody has them. So if you want to, you can step up to the mic for your question, or if you have a loud voice, you can just stand up and ask your question from the floor if you're more comfortable doing that. So any questions for Henry Heller? Yes, Mark.
My name's Mark Hudson. I'm a prof here in the sociology department and the global political economy program as well. When we talk about the neoliberal university, it seems to me that one of the important aspects of neoliberalism is the adoption of a kind of an entrepreneurial identity. And we hear about this, it works its way down to me and most other people within the university in terms of my success kind of resting on my own shoulders, that I myself have to become a kind of a research and teaching entrepreneur in order to succeed in the neoliberal university. And then it seems to work its way up from there. And we hear our own administration talking about how it has to act as a sort of successful entrepreneur in competing for international students and competing for funding from the private sector and all of these kinds of things. And as public funding for the university declines and private sources become a larger part of what makes the university tick, I wonder if there are any lessons from the resistance that you've seen in the United States. How is it that they resist that kind of adoption of the entrepreneurial subject as part of neoliberalism? Can we reject it? Can we somehow cast it off? Or does it require a politics of sort of a rejuvenation of public funding for the university before we can begin to do that? It's always, that is, presented by the administration as a kind of an inevitable, unstoppable set of practices we have to engage in order to survive in this kind of new entrepreneurial climate.
Well, I guess I would begin from, I mean, I don't stand up here and have all the answers, but I think that I would begin from the fact that knowledge, the whole development of knowledge has been a collaborative process, that knowledge and the sharing of knowledge is indispensable to, the development of education, and particularly education and both in the humanities and in the sciences, the accessibility, and that in fact there is such a thing as a scientific community, and in every discipline. If you look at the way disciplines actually operate, I mean, obviously people who go into academic life seriously and want to become successful academics are competitive in a certain sense, but they also they understand that they need to collaborate with one another. They depend on one another's work. The works of individuals are based on, essentially access to a body of community and knowledge. I would start from there and say that the chopping up of, and actually the patenting and licensing of knowledge actually runs counter to, I hate to use this language, the actual process of the generation, or I was going to use the word productivity, but I hate that kind of language in this context. So I would argue that in fact what they're doing, and that's why I call it a kind of parasitic process, they are actually in the long term, they will undermine the innovative role that higher education has played in the post-war period. That's my fundamental view of it. It's actually being undermined by this imposition of the private corporate model, and indeed, even I would argue, it does actually do great firms like Google or Microsoft actually operate in terms of everybody competing against one another? That's just ridiculous. It doesn't work that way. I guess that would be my comment on your.
Do you want the mic? I feel like I'm Phil Donahue or something.
Yes, exactly. Hi, I'm Brenda Austin-Smith, a longtime UMFA activist, and your comments outlined for us the effect of the neoliberal restructuring of the public university on one, I think, of the two pillars that I think of as sort of holding up the virtues of the, or maybe one of the two virtues of the public university, and that is academic freedom. That accountability measures and restructuring threaten academic freedom, the independence, the academic independence of, or interdependence of academics. But could you talk a little bit about the threat and the erosion of self-governance? Because I think one of the things that marks off the university as a workplace from other workplaces is that academic staff workers, whether they are regular academic staff or contract academic staff, do or have enjoyed a certain amount of input into the operations of the university by virtue of their department councils, the Senate, and other such bodies. We have a certain amount of input, of say. And it seems that the restructuring that you describe cuts at the root of collegial self-governance. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I can say something. In December of this year, last year, December 2014, the National Labor Relations Board in the United States struck down an important previous decision or it challenged a decision of the American Supreme Court made in 1979, which is known as the case of Yeshiva. And that case, which was a landmark case, basically said that faculty in the United States, tenured faculty in the United States, could not unionize because they had management functions. And this new decision, which of course is going to work itself out, we don't know how it's going to go, but this is an act of the National Labor Relations Board. It's just noteworthy, said that the situation has changed from 1979 to today. Today, the involvement by tenured faculty in governance has withered, and that, in fact, what we've seen is the greater and greater imposition of administrative control over more and more aspects of decision-making within the university. So I would say that this is what's happened. And, you know, I can only note that this is the loss of control over one's work. The loss of control over one's work in this way is really about the process of turning people fully into workers, including academic staff are being transformed fully into basically salaried workers within the academic context. That's really what's going on, in my opinion. Certainly, this is what I say in the text of the book.
Hi, I'm an old student of yours, and I'm a student in the Faculty of Engineering. And I know that in the Faculty of Engineering, it's one of the most corporatized faculties. Like some of my profs have told me about how the majority of wages paid towards the faculty members there are actually headed up not by the public sector, but the private sector and corporations. And so since it's known that like our thesis is decided for us, like as engineers, our practical thesis is decided for us by someone else. And so I was wondering, do you think that since there's a lot of corporate involvement, will they be the ones ultimately choosing what it is we will be writing our theses about? And are we kind of absorbing debt?
You were my student.
And my other kind
Did
of...
I get, I'm hoping you got something from what I had to say. I don't know.
well, I definitely learned a lot in your
But
class.
I want to address your question.
Oh, okay. And the other part of the question is just like, if that is the case, if they are in fact like controlling even as much as our theses and things like that, then are we not assuming a lot of debt as students to do their research for them? Because that's kind of the way that it seems.
Well, obviously, you're following what's going on, and really, the university, I mean, let's be fair here. I mean, the university historically developed really in terms of serving the public, but I said that, and I talked a great deal about the public university, and that's true, but from start to finish, it is always primarily served business. If you look at the history of the university, it's that nexus has always been there. But what I basically what I have been saying is that this is now the balance has swung completely in that direction to the point where the public sector university itself is being fully corporatized. And of course, what you said is right. I mean, the university is open for business and is being used. The public laboratories and so on are being used by private interests who are paying little or nothing for the use of these faculties and these facilities, basically to do their research and for them to basically profit from. And that certainly has to be questioned and, in my opinion, gone into what this, especially in terms ultimately of the democratic public interest. That would be my view of it.
In straight up economic terms too, this is a real point where we can talk to people in engineering and other professional faculties, because of course when students are doing research cheaply within a university and paying for the privilege of doing that research, there's no reason for corporations to hire them once they actually get their degrees, and thus it's competition with their wages and their future.
My colleague makes a very good point.
Other questions?
Thank you. I'm Monica, and I'm actually from University in Slovenia, but I'm here as research affiliated Institute for the Humanities. My question is, we're all, like you talked about, and we're all talking about, like how public resources are pulling out of like funding universities and other vital, social institutions. Yeah, and that like more private sources are coming in. And don't you think maybe that the problem is that the politics and government is basically just puppets in hands of like corporations, and that maybe as we were talking about like in 18th century there was like, we were talking about like separation of state and church, and I think that the problem now is that we should be talking about separation of state and business. Because I don't think that business has anything to do with like, academic freedom, and it's just not how knowledge should be produced under such circumstances. So yeah, if you can comment on that.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more, but I think that in order to sort of understand what's happened, you have to understand how this sort of neoliberalism sort of how it developed at large. I mean, it's a phenomenon that transcends the boundaries of the university, and it's deeply embedded in how the economy in North America, and indeed the economy worldwide, has evolved. And it was a response to the third chapter of my book deals with the 1960s and the 1970s, which was a combination of a political crisis and ultimately an economic crisis. And the ultimate answer that the powers that be arrived at to this dual crisis, which was, as I say, economic and political, was the neoliberal project. And so we are experiencing this within the university, something that has pervaded the entire society. And it can, I mean, the university, as I said, has become a central site. I mean, we think of the university, some people still think of the university as an ivory tower. It's completely the opposite. Knowledge has become absolutely central to the way the system now works. So it's a central point of contention as to how these universities, and particularly the public universities, are going to evolve. But as I say, the problem lies in changes which affect the entire society. The universities are just part of this more general situation.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I see that it looks like food and drink are arriving, so I once again want to thank Henry and thank all of you for coming out, and we can continue the discussion in an informal manner with food and drink.